Hello everyone and welcome to today's session, Is Your Passwordless Really Passwordless? My name is Leah Toms, EMEA Marketing Manager here at Sectigo, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. Joining us as speakers are Jason Soroko, Chief Technology Officer for PKI, and Tim Callan, Chief Compliance Officer at Sectigo. Hi Tim, hi Jason.
Hello Leah, how are you?
Thank you, I'm good. Tim and Jason will walk us through the true definition of a passwordless solution, how to tell if an approach is actually truly passwordless, and also lay out strategies for when it's difficult or even impossible to implement a true passwordless approach. If you have any questions during the presentation, please pop them into the questions function and we'll be able to answer them at the end. Tim, Jason, over to you.
Thank you very much. Passwordless is a hot term. I gave a flavor of this presentation on stage at the RSA Security Expo earlier this year. And one of the things I did in preparation, since my presentation was, the show floor opened the day before my presentation, was I just walked around and tried to see how many times on the vendor floor you can see the word passwordless. And the answer was quite a lot, right? It's a thing that a lot of vendors are talking about. You see a lot of articles about it. You see a lot of people talking about it in various different ways. And I think what Jason and I want to do is clarify, right? And when terms get really widely used and people get really interested in them, one of the things that happens is they tend to get modified and stretched and reused, and the meaning of the word tends to spread out and get a little fuzzier and imprecise, and maybe sometimes be applied to things that aren't really applicable. So what we're hoping today, I would say, Jay, is clarify what passwordless is and isn't, and why it matters, and what the implications are of being one or the other. Right, Jay?
That's right, Tim. As a marketing buzz term, one of the things that we really want to break through is to keep that term useful. There's been a lot of terms over the years that have come and gone just because they were purely, tied to some kind of a marketing function. Passwordless really does mean something, and unfortunately, it's being used in a lot of different ways. We're going to try to really narrow that down.
Yeah, and I see what's written on the slides here is pseudo passwordless. What we often say is we say it's the difference between passwordless and less password. Because most of the people who are promoting passwordless, quote unquote, even if they're not really passwordless, they're probably doing something to ease the use of passwords, which is why they're claiming to be passwordless, but it's not the same thing. So shall we move ahead?
Thanks.
All right. Now why, so Jay, why is it that so many people want to talk about passwordless?
For those of you who've been around, you might have seen demonstrations of things like keyloggers, things that basically make the bad guy's experience of stealing and harvesting passwords just so incredibly easy. Tim, one of the most common ways I've seen passwords being stolen recently are basically forged login pages that are essentially a form of man-in-the-middle attack. The reason why those things are done is because it's just so easy. It's part of a form of social engineering. Most users aren't completely aware of what website they're on or where they've been directed. They'll click on a link, they'll be challenged for a username and password, and they give it away because they think they're giving it away to a legitimate system that is challenging them for the password. And of course, if you go all the way back to the beginning, right, in terms of the problem with passwords is that it is a shared secret. And that shared secret basically means you have to know something to be able to answer that challenge. And so you're typing it in. You could be typing that into as we just said, a login site that is not legitimate. You may not know that, or you could be typing it into a system that is compromised, either at the network level or at the endpoint level. So that's that first bullet point of security. Right. But also keep in mind the user experience of passwords are also part of the problem. If you forget them, there's all kinds of social engineering around just the reestablishment of passwords and getting passwords reset. And as well, right, there's all kinds of expense involved in supporting passwords. And so I think, frankly, Tim, one of the main reasons for a lot of enterprises looking at passwordless has to do with the poor user experience and the support. The security is almost it's a nice to have, but this is part of the problem.
Right.
We've tried to solve all of these things with MFA, but MFA has each one of those previous 3 bullet points as a set of problems. And Tim, when you are rolling out, MFA on top of passwords to legacy systems for people who are now working from remote locations rather than right in the office where things, used to be a certain way, this compounds what's going on. And therefore, this is why passwordless has just become such a hot buzz term, because it does solve some of these expenses and pain points from the user experience and having to support passwords.
Yeah, and it's good that you make that distinction, because I think we see a lot of the people who are less password providers are really focused on that user experience in particular. So what they're saying is I'm a passwordless solution, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to prevent your people from sitting in front of keyboards and typing in passwords. Therefore, I'm passwordless. And preventing people from sitting in front of keyboards and typing in passwords can be a noble thing, right? With a good end result. But it doesn't deal with the security issues that you're talking about, or at least doesn't deal completely with the security issues that you're talking about.
No, that's exactly right, Tim. So therefore, that first bullet point of security, unfortunately, is not being solved by some of these pseudo passwordless systems that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and then of course, as this bottom bullet says, COVID has been a major forcing function on this, because it has really changed the ability to which people need to, offer comprehensive remote access. And instead of offering it for a small number of work from home employees and road warriors, suddenly you're offering something to the masses. And what it does is it has magnified, hasn't created, but it's magnified the problems that we had with passwords already and made them more and worse, and has therefore also diverted a lot of attention to the passwordless solution as an approach. So you kind of touched on these, but what are the benefits of passwordless? So first of all, it is a better user experience. Passwords are awful, right? We forget them. Like passwords are incredibly hard, and they're getting harder. Once upon a time, in the early days of this sort of thing, we had very few passwords. They never changed, remembered what they were. We might use the same password in more than one system. And, let's go way back in time, back in the 90s, most people thought that was okay. But now, of course, password reuse winds up being a weakness. Over simple passwords wind up being a weakness. And so the password, the consequences of passwords are that they're insanely hard. And people forget them. People have to deal with password reset. You sit there and you try something and it doesn't work, and you go, oh, did I fat finger it? And you try it again and it doesn't work, and you go, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's supposed to be capitalized in this case, and you try it again, and and then somewhere along the line you're locked out because you've tried it too many times, and now I'm not going to be able to try it whether I want to or not for the next 20 minutes. And all this kind of stuff happens to people on a routine basis, and it's frustrating. It's also a major efficiency problem, right? It costs you employee efficiency, and it leads to support burden as a result, right? I wind up getting more help desk tickets, or more problems where my employee is supposed to be able to log into the system right now and they simply can't, and all of that stuff is horrible. In addition to that, there's this whole raft of password-based attacks. So people have learned lots of ways to defeat passwords. And I've just, we've just put some of them over here on the right? Phishing, credential stuffing, brute force, dictionary attacks, social engineering, and others. And so these are attacks that are kind of unique to the username password or the shared secret paradigm. And as you can see here, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of ways that you can beat a password. So true passwordless can help with all of these problems, right, Jason?
True passwordless absolutely gives you all of these things, and I think a true passwordless, rather than rather than passwordless as an abstraction layer over passwords, but still passwords exist, is not true passwordless. True passwordless, that third bullet point is immensely stronger because of the fact that the shared secrets between systems don't exist anymore at all. And therefore, the ability for the attacker to look one layer down from your pseudo passwordless system, those problems simply don't exist. And I would also say that even in the first couple bullet points here, even though you can claim within some pseudo passwordless systems a better user experience, a better support experience overall for your company, a better profile or expenses. I think that with passwords, there's still going to be administrators behind the scenes running around having to take care of all the layers of legacy systems and technical debt that you're building. Anytime you put an abstraction layer over technical debt, you still have the technical debt, Tim. Yeah. And that's what true passwordless doesn't have.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think we've already hit on this, but passwordless is not a user experience. Passwordless is an architecture. So drill down on this, Jay. What's the difference between I don't sit at a keyboard and type in my password anymore and an actual passwordless architecture?
Tim, I think the best way to say this is this, in really simple terms. In pseudo passwordless systems, even though the user experience is improved, and it's going to be, that's pretty much the whole point of it. The problem is that there are still passwords underneath it. Therefore, you have not changed the architecture. You have not changed the system. You have not gotten rid of technical debt. You have not really truly improved security at the architectural and systems network level. You simply have not, period.
Yep.
True. And therefore, passwordless is far more than the user experience. And this is what this slide is saying.
Right. And if the ability to gain access can be granted by the use of a shared secret, then that vulnerability remains, even if the human being who is being given that access does not know the shared secret. That's the point, right?
No, that's it, Tim. I can tell you that if that username and password still exists somewhere in the system, that means that the attacker can still take advantage of that disability, that lack of security underneath the abstraction layer that you've put down, that you've purchased from what, in air quotes, a passwordless vendor.
Right.
Those vulnerable credentials still exist. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're talking about at the architectural level. You need to think about it holistically. How does the system actually work? And just because your HR person no longer has to type in a password doesn't mean the password doesn't exist. It doesn't mean the attacker still can't take advantage of it. That's a huge distinction.
Yeah, and as you see here, the second bullet, a better user experience is a benefit, but it is not the only benefit. So even if you provide a better user experience, there are other important, valuable benefits that that are still to be gained from a true passwordless approach. So there is no shared secret because there is no shared secret. So Jason, what's a shared secret?
A shared secret is if Tim, you and I wanted to do business together, you and I might agree ahead of time. If you came to my house tonight and knocked on my door 3 times, I will open the door regardless of who it is that knocked 3 times. Just because that's a secret, only you know it. You knock 3 times, I'm going to open the door. Terrific. But that is a pre-negotiated piece of knowledge that both you and I now have. If the bad guy somehow overheard us making that negotiation, well, that bad guy can then come up to my door, knock 3 times, I'm going to open the door, and I'm in trouble. Well, guess what? A password is no different than making a pre-negotiation of knock 3 times on my door. That is known secret that to me, the person trying to log into a system and the system itself. And therefore, it has every single vulnerability possible about that thing being overheard. You heard man-in-the-middle attacks and keylogging. And in other words, there are vulnerabilities from a social engineering standpoint. There are vulnerabilities from the endpoint. There are vulnerabilities at the network level. And passwords have been stolen so many different ways. And Tim, as you had in the previous slide, there's even other ways to harvest credentials, such as credential stuffing, basically due to password reuse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
All of these problems are problems because the secret is symmetric. That's a kind of a technical term to mean the secret is known to 2 parties, to both parties. And so therefore, it doesn't matter how long your passwords are. It doesn't matter what your corporate password change policy is. Change your password every 90 days. It simply doesn't matter. That password as a shared secret will be compromised at some point. And we hear endlessly examples of that.
Yeah.
And so therefore,
the more we do to try to make them strong, in another way, we make them weaker, right? Because they become unusable, right? So once upon a time, every password I had only lived in my brain. And now, you say, okay, you have to have logins to 50 different things. All of those logins need to be different. They all need to change on a regular basis. And they all need to be, long and complex in various ways. And it is very difficult for people to remember that. And so as a consequence, some of that doesn't happen. They're not complex, or they're reused, or they're recorded somewhere. Some people use password wallets, but those aren't perfect either. And so as a consequence, that just the need to make it better, perversely in a weird way, also makes it worse.
And Tim, I got to tell you an old example of a demonstration did probably a little more than 10 years ago now. It's kind of revealing just how old I really am. I can tell you, I remember once a person in a room telling me, well, if you just make your password long enough that nobody will ever be able to guess it. And I remember once having an infected computer, infected on purpose for demonstration purposes. And I literally copied and pasted text from a Mongolian website with an alphabet that I'm simply not familiar with. I pasted that in to the compromised computer and was able to then retrieve that from the keylogging system.
There you go.
So therefore, even if your password were 150 Mongolian characters,
right,
it's still going to be compromised.
So even if you use that random looking thing that might be suggested for you, that could still be keylogged. Yes, absolutely. The keylogger doesn't care. The keylogger, the name of your favorite pet or some random string is irrelevant to the keylogger. It's still the same. It's still the same exercise that takes place. So let's clarify, because we're going to get into architecture a little, the difference between a password and a PIN. This is very important, right? The PIN, which doesn't have to be a 4-digit or a 6-digit number, by the way. Once upon a time, that's what PINs were, and we all remember that from the cash machine at the bank. But a PIN simply means a secret that you input to use a device that you possess that is stored locally on that device. It doesn't go out across a network. So when I have to log into my laptop and I type something in that allows my laptop to unlock, or when I have to put something in my phone that allows my phone to unlock, that is, in this architecture, what we refer to as a PIN. And that's an important distinction, right, Jay?
It's an incredibly important distinction. The reason why we're bringing this up is because a lot of true passwordless systems will involve challenging you to enter a PIN in order to be able to complete the challenge, complete the authentication challenge. And that is only because quite often, right, there's a physical device, there's a laptop, there's a mobile device, and there's obviously some sort of asymmetric secret that's involved in the passwordless architecture. And in order to be able to then complete that authentication, there needs to be some type of assurance sometimes that, yes, the person we actually intended to be able to utilize that stronger form of secret to complete authentication is actually who we intend. And so, yes, this is a form of shared secret, but as you said, Tim, it's very limited in terms of how it's able to be, how it's being used. It's not going across the internet. It's much, much less vulnerable. I would say that the most common form of, PIN or PIN replacement is biometric. For example, anytime you open up your Android phone or your iPhone, typically you're challenged for your biometric. That's no different than a PIN, and it essentially ensures that the person who's picking up the phone and trying to use it is actually the intended user. So think of this as exactly the same thing, but to help to complete authentication of a true passwordless system.
Right. And the benefit of the PIN, of course, if this isn't obvious, is it ensures that the device is used by the person who's supposed to use the device. And then at that point, we can cryptographically ensure that the device is the device we think it is, and that's something that can't be defeated because it's not a shared secret model. Just to kind of jump ahead. So that's where the PIN enters into it. And of course, because the PIN isn't traveling across the open internet, you can't do all these things we talked about. You can't really become, sit in the middle and grab something and, put up a fake page and load it onto the real page, because it's all contained in that device. So all right. So what is? So if a shared secret architecture doesn't work for access because it has these fundamental vulnerabilities that can't go away, and if any shared secret architecture is a password, true passwordless can't have a shared secret, Jay, right? So what do we have instead?
Yeah, so a long time ago, and we're talking in the realm of nearly 30 years now, the idea of breaking a secret into parts. And those two parts are in PKI, typically called the private key and the public key. And again, let's go back to our original analogy of you coming to my door and knocking 3 times. If you were to break that secret into half, you could, subscribe to a system, right? A PKI system that says, all right, well, here's everybody's public key. Here's the public form of the secret is shared amongst everybody so that we all know how to address each other. Terrific. But then you can challenge me, Tim, to say, hey, is that really you, Jay? And I would then sign that challenge with my private part of the secret. And then you would know necessarily that it is me. And the beauty is you don't have my full secret. I don't have your full secret. And our ability to keep our secrets secret is a lot stronger than any form of traditional shared secret system. And so I don't know if everybody knows this, but that form of secrets architecture, typically in PKI, is now so prevalent and ubiquitous, as it says in this slide. It fits so many use cases in computing. It's basically everywhere. And those of you who are using your laptops right now, using your phones, you've probably, without knowing it, had dozens, if not more than a few dozen PKI-based systems that are allowing you to log in, allowing you to have strongly secure firmware on your device, being able to even share music or browse a website, Tim. Everything you're doing is probably over some kind of PKI system, even without you knowing it. And so therefore, I find it interesting that when we talk about traditional authentication, simply the experience of logging into a computer system, we still gravitate typically towards architectures that are based on shared secrets, username, passwords, and another shared secret, which is some form of multi-factor authentication on top of it.
Right.
And people think that that's normal. But the rest of the computing world has moved on to asymmetric secrets. And as it says here, for the enterprise, how do you deal with all of those asymmetric secrets, the generation of them, the provisioning of them, storage of them? Well, those technologies exist and they're available within the form of certificate lifecycle management and provisioning technologies such as Acme and a lot of other surrounding technologies, Tim, which has been quite mature, and it is the right way to do things. And I would say that it can be the basis of true passwords.
Yeah. And just to be clear, so without getting into the math behind it, cryptographers have done a really neat thing, which is that I have what's called a private key, and I can use that to create a public key. And only the holder of the private key can prove that it's their public key. But at the same time, you can't use the public key to figure out the private key. And that's the key. And that means I can give my public key to anyone. And all of this stuff is mathematically and computationally impossible to break. And so as a consequence, I can throw out this public key to the world, and anybody who uses my public key can be assured with 100% assurance that they're communicating with the real party that provided that public key. And that's how this whole thing is able to work. And as you said, Jay, right, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. If it weren't for PKI, you wouldn't be able to use your personal computer or your phone or any modern financial system or any smart infrastructure at your place of work, or if you have smart devices in your home or your modern automobile. All of those things would simply stop working without PKI. It is ubiquitous. If there's a chip, there's a certificate. And this one place, which is human beings logging into systems, is the one place that is still trying to catch up.
You got it, Tim.
So great. So PKI-based true passwordless gives us the benefits we talked about, right? It prevents your users from having to type in passwords. They have to remember a single PIN per device or use a biometric on those devices. They don't even need to remember a PIN, but they got to know one PIN per device that they would have to know anyway. Other than that, they can connect to these systems through PKI, through secure PKI-enabled access. All the problems of stealing passwords go away. It's a better user experience. You have less help desk tickets. You have less people getting locked out with productivity losses. So what is to prevent us from doing this everywhere?
Because of the fact that, Tim, there's obviously going to be legacy systems that may not support asymmetric secrets, and therefore the system was hard-coded to only ever be able to be used in passwords. And we have to accept the fact that those are going to exist.
Yeah.
They're going to be, we're going to live in a hybrid world probably for the rest of all of our professional careers who are listening to this. Even those of you who are starting, passwords are probably going to be around forever. And so in order to be able to deal with that problem, right, then there are other technologies that can help you. This is where, when you look at best security guidance practices, you're looking at things such as network segmentation and monitoring to scrutinize activity, right? There's all kinds of other layers of security to help with that.
Right.
But the problem we're trying to address with this slide, Tim, is the fact that because of the fact that you're going to have technologies that are going to call themselves passwordless, that are merely abstraction layers over password-based systems. Those are perfect, in my opinion, to be able to be applied against legacy systems.
Yeah.
Perfect. Very good. Those are, we're not poo-pooing at all the idea of pseudo passwordless. It has a place in the world, and where its place is legacy systems where asymmetric secrets and PKI cannot be used.
Yeah.
So therefore, if you have a system that can take advantage of PKI, I'm talking about things that are cloud native, as an example, right? SaaS applications, and you might have I'm going to give you an example, right? World's largest CRM SaaS application. You guys can all guess what I'm referring to. The default setting is you log in with a username and password, and then you can add MFA to it. I can also tell you that because it's a modern application, adding a PKI-based authentication scheme and then rolling that out to the rest of your company, that's absolutely a possibility because that system's been built to be able to handle it. And most modern applications now have that capacity. In fact, Windows itself, Tim, right, with Windows Hello, right, remote desktop applications, VPN systems, so many different systems can take advantage of basically PKI-based authentication, asymmetric secrets, completely passwordless. Phenomenal. Phenomenal user experience and phenomenal security. What we're talking about here is the really old applications that probably are sitting in server racks in your enterprise. You can't get rid of them simply because they run part of the company. Perfect. Then perhaps you can utilize these pseudo passwordless systems to help to improve the user experience. You're not necessarily improving security, but you are going to improve the user experience quite a bit, and there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and so let me hit the second to last bullet. I want to build on that point. So let's hit the second to last bullet. When updates do occur, look to add passwordless. So one of the things is, you may have these legacy systems and they're lingering, but they often don't linger forever, right? And sooner or later, somewhere along the line, you got to deal. When you deal, at that point, don't go back to another password implementation just because that's what you had, right? That's when you want to look at using PKI-based authentication on that old legacy system that I'm rooting out and replacing with something new. And on the one hand, you and I sit here and we say, well, these things will probably never go away forever. But there is a forcing function, and this is probably we'll probably be giving this webinar too, so come back and join us for that. But there is a forcing function on the way, which is that post-quantum cryptography is going to become necessary for any system. You don't want to be compromised. And that might be the thing that makes us finally get rid of these old legacy systems, because we simply can't be secure without it. And if that rolls around in the next few years and you're doing that to your legacy systems in the next few years, then once again, do not replace them with a password, right? That's where you should replace them with PKI-based authentication now that you have the chance. And the high order takeaway from this whole thing is the last bullet, which is don't fall for the lowest common denominator fallacy. Don't fall for this fallacy of saying, well, I can't do everything. So because I can't do everything, I'm not going to do anything, right? Rather, more security is better, and more secure is better. And to the degree that you can eliminate these possible points of ingress, you should. And if you can eliminate some of the points of ingress without eliminating them all, don't let those stragglers prevent you from upgrading the other things that can be prevented. So, we really encourage, if you've got to do some less password because you have no choice, so be it, but don't let that hold you back from improving other things. Number one, because, that could be the attack point. And number two, because if you're eventually getting to a true passwordless architecture one bit at a time, the more of those bits that you put to bed, those more of those are things that don't have to be done in the future. So if you like this conversation, Jason and I talk a lot about PKI, certificates, cryptography, security, quantum computing, passwordless, things like that. And we have a podcast. It's called the Root Causes PKI and Security Podcast. It's available all the popular places where you might go listen to podcasts. We encourage you to check us out. We have nearly 250 episodes published today, and there's a lot of content, and we're releasing new podcasts almost every week. So we'd love to have you hear us. And with that, I think we are ready to go to questions. Leah, do we have any questions?
Thanks, Tim. Yes, we've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
How does PKI fit in with single sign-on?
Sure. We mentioned single sign-on earlier. Single sign-on is one of those abstraction layers that Jason was talking about, right? And Jay, feel free to jump in here, but I think what single sign-on does is it lets you automatically open up and sign up various services, both internal and external services, without having to log into them individually. But your single sign-on solution can handle those automatic connections with PKI, right? It doesn't have to be an abstracted. This is one of the things we call an abstraction layer. So like a basic, a password-based approach to single sign-on would be that the username and password are stored by the single sign-on application, and it goes and it connects to whatever service you're trying to log into, and it feeds those things in automatically, right? But it could also do that through PKI.
Yeah, in fact, PKI is going to be, because of difficulty in unraveling the original secret, Tim, and that original challenge that's letting you into multiple systems. PKI has a big advantage because of the fact that everything we've just said previously about the enhanced security of an asymmetric secret, which PKI is based on. And so therefore, to really dig at the heart of the question, I'll give you a real world example of this. You could have a laptop which has an asymmetric secret, basically a certificate, PKI-based certificate that is stored in a secure element within that laptop that will allow you to then log into perhaps the corporate network and a VPN, and then at the exact same time also be able to log into your Office 365 applications and your Microsoft applications as well. And so your user experience, I find it quite interesting that people talk a lot about SSO and PKI fits in, but keep in mind that what would even be the difference of the user experience if it's true passwordless? In other words, is it architected as SSO or is it not? And does it matter? Mm-hmm. In my mind, it really depends on how your network architects and your application architects want to be able to set things up and how isolated they are in behind the scenes. To the actual user, a true passwordless user experience amongst all these different applications will look no different if it's true passwordless PKI or SSO. So therefore, you're talking about behind the scenes stuff that somehow somebody in IT made a decision of.
Yeah, exactly. Like if it's true passwordless every step of the way, and I've got my local, I go into my device with my PIN, and then my local device has a cert that signs into the single sign-on application using PKI, and then the single sign-on application proceeds to sign me into various other things using PKI, then you're right. Whether single sign-on is sitting there or not is simply a function of the IT team deciding the right way to do it. Correct. The user never sees the difference.
And I would say I would even make the argument. I'd love for anybody to tell me if they think otherwise, but I would make the argument that I would avoid SSO because it's an unnecessary layer. In other words, if I'm logging into my laptop and then I'm also logging into my favorite SaaS CRM, and then I'm also logging into my Office 365, all of those things can be very secure authentication mechanisms without SSO. Very, very secure, because each of the systems is now isolated and has no other layer of SSO that can be broken, such as with session keys and all the other problems associated. You can get rid of all of that, just have true passwordless, and you're done.
Yeah. Now, as you pointed out, though, in this scenario where there are systems that are not yet passwordless, either because they technically can't support it or they haven't been implemented yet, then SSO might be a valuable addition for those. So I can imagine a scenario where I've got a bunch of passwordless ready systems. I go into my device, I use my biometric or my PIN, there's a cert on my device, and a bunch of things. It just uses PKI for direct access. But then I've got this subset of services that are available to my users that, for whatever reason, for either of those two reasons just listed, aren't yet passwordless, either because they can't or just because we haven't gotten that far on our roadmap yet. And you could see single sign-on serving those. So that person is still not dealing with it. And those would be, buried passwords that are being used by single sign-on. And then you can also imagine, as those systems get to the roadmap, as the roadmap gets to those systems and those become passwordless as well, then they get ripped out of the single sign-on scenario and moved into the direct PKI scenario. And in either case, all of this is happening invisibly behind the scenes, and the average user who's just trying to get their job done never even sees it.
It's for legacy, that's for sure.
Okay, great. Or for works in progress. Okay, next question.
Next question is there already a model of deployment, a best practice, so to speak?
I'm trying to interpret that question. Do you think I'm not sure I know what that question is asking, Jay. Do you think you know what that question is asking?
Well, I can tell you right now that true passwordless exists. It 100% exists. A lot of examples that you'll see are using mobile devices, where essentially the asymmetric secret that we talked about so much exists on the mobile device. And then as you're going through your life, perhaps on a laptop or on other systems, you could be challenged on your from your mobile device. So in other words, you're not looking at entering passwords, but you are looking at the user experience being involved with things like push notifications, right? Mm-hmm. So if the question is based on, what are the current ways of doing true passwordless, what does it look like, what are the best practices, that's probably one of the most common ones right now, is utilizing a mobile device for the asymmetric secret and using push notifications as to complete the challenge.
So let me ask you a follow-on question to that, and this kind of ties into our last one too. If I'm using off-the-shelf software, let's say, or software that I'm getting from a vendor, either on-prem or SaaS, should I have a reasonable expectation that these packages are going to allow me to provide access through PKI? Is this a table stakes kind of piece of functionality that we expect from everything? Or is it possible that some of my software that I've chosen simply doesn't have that capability today?
I think it's become table stakes for anything net new, Tim. Anything cloud native will probably have a capability of interacting with some form of asymmetric secret, whether that's the form of a crypto key, whether that's the form of an actual managed certificate. Maybe this is a good time to bring up concepts such as FIDO and other forms of authentication that sometimes are used passwordless. One of the big differences between, say, FIDO and FIDO crypto keys and basically leaf certificates typically put on an endpoint is that the ability to roll out and manage these certificates in an enterprise, certificate lifecycle management really helps to do that form of management for certificates. It really helps to make the rollout, the lifecycle management, and everything else that goes on with digital identities and credentials possible within a controlled environment. But keep in mind, you might not always be dealing with controlled environments. You might be dealing with, banking customers, and in other words, not just B2B or business to employee, but also business to customer. And so therefore, sometimes certificates, centrally managed certificates for large uncontrolled populations of people aren't always easy and possible. So enter, a much more simpler form of digital identity, which is just the crypto key. And that's quite often what you see with FIDO, right, Sim? So in other words, uh, I think the way I'm trying to answer your question is it's now so prevalent in these systems. All of the major operating systems support asymmetric secrets and certificates. Just about all cloud-based systems are supporting it. Really, the only stuff I'm seeing that's coming out that doesn't are, basically additions to legacy
Right.
on-premise heavy platforms, old finance systems, old HR systems, and those kinds of things. I think that still dealing with, say, in your personal life, with, basically you're looking at social media applications and things like that you're probably used to using, where they went from, they went through the full evolution of username password to the username password with MFA, and now we're even dealing with some social media systems that have gotten rid of passwords for most of the experience. The problem, though, is that if you look under the covers, there are still passwords to be able to recover accounts, and they're not true passwordless. So I would say, Tim, we are dealing with a hybrid world. We're probably always going to be in a hybrid world, but I would say that very specifically for the enterprise user, you're still going to have some legacy systems. You're going to easily identify which those are, but most of the net new application procurement you're going to do, it's going to be able to have, if not totally true passwordless, at least some form of passwordless experience.
Great. All right, next question.
Next question is, since passwords have all these problems, how come they use so much?
Yeah, that probably, I think that probably came early in the seminar, because I think we covered a lot of that. There, well, first of all, once upon a time, they're all there was, right? And so I think we all got used to it, and there was this backlog of legacy that had it, and some of that stuff, or much of that stuff, has been upgraded, but not all of it has. Yeah, that said, they are used a lot, aren't they? And I think some of that is just not knowing there's a better way. Do you agree, Jay?
Tim, I think that's probably the number one reason, if I have to put reasons on a sheet of paper. When you're talking about people who are in the business of just building applications, they're typically not security experts first, they're developers first.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it is very, very easy to simply add a username and password as an authentication system.
Right, because this has been what I've been doing since I was a little kid, right? and so I just do the thing I've always been doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think what needs to happen, and this is what's happening, is that the ability for a developer to literally drag and drop a set of passwordless functionality into their applications and then just utilize it like that, so they're not having to reinvent the wheel. That's where the industry has been going, Tim, and that's why you're starting to see net new systems support passwordless as default. And I think that is the way the world is going. But we certainly are having to deal with 30, 40 years of computing where passwords were the only way of doing things. We're starting to see the extreme weakness of multi-factor authentication on top of passwords, Tim. And I think that might be the thing that breaks the camel's back, is weakness of MFA, making people realize that you can't bend it over passwords anymore. They just have to go away.
Yeah.
Cool. Then we have got one other question. What kinds of certificates would be appropriate for user authentication?
So we're talking typically about, Tim, we call them TLS certificates. They're of an X509 format, and it very, very simply, a certificate is an envelope for a private public key pair to be able to then be stored onto typically a secure element within mobile device, within your laptop, within an IoT device, you name it. You securely store these things, and then they can be used to sign authentication challenges. Tim, they can also be used to encrypt. They can also be used to sign documents and code, right? So there's a lot of things you can do with certificates.
And the certificates you might have, right? You might be probably putting client certificates on the machines, right? On the clients, hence the name. And that's probably a form of an S/MIME certificate, as opposed to your server certificates, which would be like your TLS, as opposed to the other kinds of certificates you have in your mix that also matter. You're going to want signing certs, so you can have code signing certs, document signing certs, and then there's a family of other certs as well, but those are probably the main ones, right?
Yeah, so typically, if you're going to go off and procure these things, you're going to be talking about authentication certificates specifically, which comes under the guise of TLS certificates. I would say the most common mistake I hear customers ask or think is their experience with PKI-based certificates typically comes from the world of SSL, right? Web server certificates that are meant to encrypt browser to web server sessions. And so I have people quite often ask me, Tim, even to this day, hey, for authentication, do I need to go get an SSL certificate? And the answer is no. It's the SSL certificates are for a completely different purpose. They're formed slightly differently. They're the fact that they can root up to something that is in the root store of your browsers. Tim, you know all about that stuff. That's unnecessary for the purposes of TLS based certificate authentication. And so therefore, I think what you're really looking for in terms of authentication certificates is to manage those certificates within a certificate lifecycle management system to be able to handle renewals and revocation and all the things that come with the lifecycle of those certificates. So that's what to look for.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question. Are there other types of multi-factor authentication on the horizon that will get around the limitations you talked about?
I would say that, Tim, you and I were talking about pseudo passwordless, and you could consider pseudo passwordless to be a form of multi-factor authentication that removes the password entry part of the experience from the experience. Keep in mind, of course, there's still a password underlying that, and implementing this form of multi-factor authentication, if you want to call it that, will involve quite a bit of work. I would say, though, that very modern form of MFA is going to be perfect for legacy systems where you can only support using a password as an authentication scheme. It's a lot of work to put in, but it may be worth it when you consider the return on investment of getting rid of all support issues and things like that. Everything we talked about early on in this webinar.
Yeah, and this may be a little academic, but and a PKI-based passwordless scenario could be argued to be a form of MFA, because you have either the thing you know, and either the thing you have or the thing you are, right? Or sorry, you have the thing you have and either the thing you know or the thing you are. So the thing I have is a device. It's a mobile device. It's a laptop. And that is one of my factors. And if I don't have that, I can't connect with the PKI-based scenario, because that's where the certificate resides, right? But then there's a second factor that's required. I either need to put in the PIN, which is the thing I know, or I need to use my biometric, my face or my fingerprint, which is the thing I have, or the thing I am, rather. So you've got that second thing. You've got that thing you have, and that either that thing you know or that thing you are. And those are two factors, right? So at a basic definitional level, that is a multi-factor authentication scheme. It's not really what we mean when we say MFA in general usage, because what we mean by that is layering one or more things on top of a shared secret. But in that scenario, that is actually using multiple factors, and that's one of the reasons that it's strong and trustworthy.
It's interesting, isn't it? This whole webinar is about the confusion of the fact that passwordless is used multiple ways.
Yep.
And now you just pointed out, Tim, how MFA can truly be used multiple ways as well. It's about sorting out the confusion.
Yep.
Great. I think that's it with the questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. If you have any more questions, then just do get in touch with the Sectigo team, and also keep an eye on our channel for more upcoming presentations. And we hope to see you again soon.